Hi everyone, welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott, also known as Cineram. I do the Thursday videos on this collaboration channel, and I am recording this video live. I am doing direct uploads instead of using this camera because this camera broke on me. It didn't even fall on the floor. It basically was standing on its end on a table and then went poop on its face, and now apparently it doesn't work anymore. So I need a new one, but in the meantime I'll be using this. So last week we had a theme of Philip K. Dick, which I missed, but actually I wasn't really planning on doing a Philip K. Dick movie because I'd already done two prior movies with that theme, even though that wasn't the specific theme. One was on Winona Ryder, so I did A Scanner Darkly, which is based on a Philip K. Dick book. And the other one was Minority Report, because it was Colin Farrell week and he was in that movie. So if you want to see either of those two videos, those are my Philip K. Dick videos. They're linked in the description below. They're just from months earlier. Our theme this week is on movies. Based that came to mind was Danny Dunn. Danny Dunn was a series of books about a kid who was, I guess, junior high school age, and he had a couple of friends, but he also had an adult friend who was a scientist. That sounds familiar. Could it be something like Back to the Future? Anyway, in each book, the scientist had developed this brand new invention, which Danny Dunn would kind of accidentally and not on purpose try out and then get all kinds of trouble. One of them was a time machine. There are a few others, but the one that really sort of stood out to me because it hadn't actually been made into anything like a film that I've seen is called Danny Dunn and the Automatic House, which is about a brand new kind of house. These were written like in the 50s, I think, these books, that had all these modern day kind of futuristic tools to do things automatically, like the bath would automatically fill, or the fridge would tell you when you needed more food, or the oven would automatically preheat, or something like that, you know. And it even had sort of a computerized artificial intelligence that ran things, and the house actually could turn on its entire foundation depending on where the sun was. And I'd never seen, a film depicting anything like that. Time travel I'd seen before, and I'd seen a lot of the other stuff like robots, what have you, robot servants. But yeah, the Automatic House was different. So I'd always kind of wanted to see a film made out of that, but it never was. I'd also come across a series of books about a kid and his two friends. It usually came down to basically the main character was like a boy, and he had two close friends, one of whom was a boy and the other whom was a girl. That was the same thing with Danny Dunn. And this kid basically received as a gift from someone, who we never find out who it is, sneakers with superpowers. You put them on and you get a superpower. The red ones I think were for flying, and the blue ones were for speed, and the yellow ones were for something else. So he wore a pair, and his friend who was a girl wore a pair, and his friend who was a boy wore a pair, and they had superpowers and they did all kinds of crazy stuff. Can't remember what the books are called or who they were by, but I remember them from then. I also remember a series of books that were more like novels. The Boxcar Children. The Boxcar Children was basically a series of kids, a group of kids. I think they were a family, and they were all brothers and sisters. And the older sister, I think, took care of them all, kind of like Wendy, taking care of the Lost Boys and Peter Pan. But they had to, I don't know, leave their home for some reason. They end up living in an abandoned train car, one of those cargo, a freight car basically. And so they made their home out of that, and they would put their fruit in the cold water of the stream nearby to keep them fresh and keep them preserved. And they just had to survive like that for a couple of books. I can't really remember how that happened. I remember the drawing style was very distinctive. The illustrations were all very black, and the defining lines of the characters were white. So if you had a character with eyes and a nose, the eyes and nose would be drawn in white, but the rest of them was black. It was kind of unusual. Don't remember too much about that book series, but I remember, finding that interesting. But the most interesting book series that I'd read as a kid was called The Great Brain. And that was basically, the main character was a kid whose older brother was super smart and was always cooking up these scams to like make money amongst the kids in his neighborhood. And they would always backfire on him, and the kid would always get in trouble. They were sort of told through the eyes of the younger brother. That was a really good series right there. I think that took place during the Depression, so it was written, many decades ago. Yeah, that was one that I'd always wanted to see made into a film, at least one. At one point they actually, I think there was a book called The Great Brain. in which basically all the kids in the neighborhood put the great brain, the older brother character, on trial for all the scams they tried to pull over the years. But the only book series that I read as a kid that got actually turned into a film finally was Tintin. Tintin it's a series of books. I don't know how long it is, but it's by a French artist named Herge. And of course they were all translated in English, but they were basically like novel-sized comic books. Basically, they were drawn panels with the characters speaking, and the main character Tintin was this very young. He looked like a kid, really. He looked like a teenager, but in fact he's a young adult who works as a reporter for a newspaper. And he always gets tangled up on all these adventures involving international smuggling rings and buried treasure and things like that. There were a couple of books that I owned. I think they were probably Christmas presents. One of them was called The Black Island, and the other one, I can't remember exactly what the name of it was, but the cover illustration was a man with a very long beard and glasses being elevated in his chair by this weird swirling thing. I can't remember exactly what they were called. But one of the books, called The Secret of the Unicorn, was the one that was the basis for the film that Steven Spielberg directed and that Peter Jackson produced when it came out in 2011. My Wi-Fi connection kind of gets interrupted sometimes when I do these uploads, so I'm doing this in pieces and then putting it all together later. So in the story, Tintin basically comes across a model ship in a sort of an open park market and buys it. And immediately some other people come up to him and say, "Oh, I want to buy that ship from you. Name your price." It's like, "Oh, it's not for sale. I'm keeping this ship." They desperately want this model ship, and he doesn't know why. Eventually, his apartment gets broken into, and the ship gets stolen. But as it turns out, the mast had been broken before that happened, and a tiny little cylinder, basically a metal cylinder, hidden in the mast, falls out. And inside is a parchment which contains an inscription and some clues to what Tintin doesn't know, but he's basically going to go on an adventure, and eventually involves the captain of a ship who's the latest in a long line of haddocks. Their name is Haddock, basically, and it's a series of people who were ship captains, but they were under this curse involving this treasure. The treasure basically was being pursued by this pirate by the name of Red Rackham. The character of Tintin is played by Jamie Bell, and the character of Haddock, the latest in the Haddocks, basically, who is the character in the film, is played by Serkis, who of course played Gollum, and he played Caesar in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And then you have the principal villain, who's the guy who's after the ships and after all the little parchments, and what they lead to. That character is played by Daniel Craig. Of course, this is one of those performance capture movies, a bit like the Robert Zemeckis films that came out a few years back, like Beowulf and the Polar Express, where the actors basically perform on an empty stage, and their body movements and facial expressions are recorded on a computer, and then those movements are applied then to a computer-animated character, along with their voice. So basically, they're sort of self-animating these characters with their movements. This process has its drawbacks. I kind of prefer the more specifically cartoonish characters, ones that are animated by animators, versus the ones that are animated by human movements, because they tend to look kind of strange. The characters moving around in a human fashion, even though they're clearly not. It's a little odd. There are a couple other drawbacks to this movie, one of which is the pace just never ever settles down for a second. I mean, things are just moving so quickly that you never really have time to catch a breath, and that's a little not especially pleasant. You know, there's animated movies tend to be very energetic and upbeat, and this one right here, I really would have wanted a few quieter moments where it just basically goes from one mishap and one adventure and one development to the next with barely a pause for breath. The other issue that I have with the movie is the same issue that I had with the books, and that is this Tintin character is really sort of odd. He doesn't appear to have any kind of responsibility except for his dog. His dog is named Snowy. It's this little white dog that he takes with him everywhere. Even if he's being kidnapped or goes overseas or to other countries, the dog is always with him. The dog never stays at home and is watched over by a neighbor. But aside from that, he never has a boss to report to. He never has any reports to file. He doesn't have a family, doesn't have parents, doesn't have siblings, doesn't have a girlfriend, anything like that. He's just all on his own. And the only real friend that he seems to have aside from his dog is this Captain Haddock character who he meets for the first time in this film. And Haddock actually is a character who is in a lot of the other Tintin books, so they're hanging out a lot of the time. I remember reading 2 of these books basically that were probably separated by several adventures. In one book that's early in this series, Haddock basically doesn't have any money, and then the later book basically is filthy rich. So so something happened in there where he got a lot of treasure. I don't really know how that happened, but the movie may provide an answer for that. Anyway, Spielberg directed this one, as I said, and Peter Jackson produced, and they were going to do a second movie with Jackson directing and Steven Spielberg producing, but that hasn't happened so far, and I'm not sure it will, because I don't recall this being a monster hit. I don't know how much money it actually made. It was probably hugely expensive. Because of all the animation that needs to go into doing a film like this, all the set pieces, all the different locations, everything like that, you know, every single scene is just so incredibly detailed. You know, it's one of the most detailed animated movies I've ever seen. And there's a real big showpiece towards the end of the film that takes place in a Moroccan city, where there's a whole chase scene. Tintin's on a motorcycle pursuing Daniel Craig's character in a Jeep, and Haddock's there, and Tintin's by a falcon basically, and they're in the claws and beak of a falcon, and this scene goes on for like 5 minutes, and it's just one long continuous shot. Not that there are actual shots in an animated movie, because there's no cameras actually on location, but it's a scene without any cuts in it. It just basically dives and weaves all over the place in this ridiculous fashion. Buildings collapsing all around them, and people diving into streams and hanging onto wires and just like barely escaping things by the skin of their teeth. It's crazy. It's just a crazy scene. But that, unfortunately, wasn't the climax of the movie. After that scene takes place, there's another scene in which 2 characters are basically fighting each other with giant construction cranes. Each one is at the helm of a big construction crane, and they're smashing into each other and smashing into buildings. I'm just like, when is this going to be over? This is just going on way too long, and I'm just not that invested in what's happening anymore. So this is a movie I can't really recommend. It's certainly spectacular looking, but certainly not one of my favorite animated movies, and definitely not one of my favorite Spielberg movies. So I can't really recommend it. But some of you might be into it. You know, you might want to see it just for the animation, which is, pretty dazzling. If you like performance capture animation, which I'm not as fond of. Not in an all-animated movie. Performance capture, obviously, when applied to an animated character in a live-action movie, like with Watchmen or Pirates of the Caribbean or Lord of the Rings or whatever, those seem to work out really well. I mean, they can be very photorealistic. But in this context, it's a little strange, especially when you have animated camera movements. The camera movements obviously are not photographed on a set. They're much too acrobatic. There's a scene actually where Tintin is chasing a pickpocket, a guy who's stolen his wallet, and he runs out in the middle of the street, but he has to dodge all these cars. Instead of taking the shot from far away and seeing him dart in between the cars, it just kind of, there's several separate shots that are just bobbing and weaving all over him, and it's just much too busy, for me anyway. So anyway, there's my review of Tintin. It's called The Adventures of Tintin, actually. That's the full title of the movie. And it was, of course, directed by Steven Spielberg. And I wanted to thank you for watching and for looking at the other guys' videos if you have. And if you haven't already, please check out theirs. We had reviews of Indian in the Cupboard and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and a couple others. So check them out if you haven't seen them. We were going to do a theme on James Gandolfini, who unfortunately passed away last week at a surprisingly young age of only 51. We were going to do that in 4 or 5 weeks' time, but we've moved it up. We are going to be starting that tomorrow. And I believe Big Al 1982 is going to be talking about James Gandolfini's lead character in The Sopranos, the television series, and I have a film of Gandolfini's which I'm going to be doing, and hopefully a lot of the other guys will be wanting to do that as well. So we hope you'll tune in for that, and thanks very much again for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye.